I would like to introduce the final keynote speaker of the day, Dr. Katherine Ferrier, if you'd like to make your way up here. Dr. Ferrier is the coordinator for the Certificate of Advanced Studies in Corporate Social Responsibility at the University of Geneva. A graduate of the Universities of Grenoble and Geneva, she initially studied European and International Law and International Relations. In 2007, she obtained a PhD in Social Sciences from the University of Geneva. Her thesis focused on the legal and institutional aspects of carbon trading in the context of climate change mitigation policy. Her recent research focuses on freshwater management and climate change policies. She currently manages a Certificate of Advanced Studies in Corporate Social Responsibility program at the University of Geneva and lectures in environmental law and policy at the university. She also lectures at University of Applied Sciences of Western Switzerland, WWF Switzerland, as well as for the SIT program in Switzerland. Please join me in a warm welcome for Dr. Katherine Ferrier.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation. Bad habit. Okay. Do you have a remote control or?
That's fine.
So.
I'll do it for you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I know I am the last speaker of the day. I guess you've had a whole full day of discussions and presentations, and you must be all very tired, so I'll try to keep this as lively and interesting as possible. I have the question I wanted to address right now was really the question of governance, from international governance of the environment and sustainable development. What role can we see for the private sector? So first, from sustainable development to the green economy. Very briefly, what has been achieved since we first started discussing at international level of the environment. It all started in Stockholm in 1972. That first conference really brought on the agendas the environmental issues. Okay. Then, in 1987, the Brundtland Report came with a definition of sustainable development. I wrote it here now because we discussed the definition earlier. And this definition of a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs is not easy to understand and not easy to apply and to implement, because the big question here is what is a need, and what needs are we thinking of? Needs may be different depending on the situation, the country, the time, and if it's so difficult to address and to define present needs, how can we define the needs of the future? But still, it's been the basis for all the discussion and the development of this concept for the last 25 years. So let's keep with it and keep moving. 1992, the Rio Earth Summit, very big momentum regarding the environment, and particularly the time when it happened is important. It was the post-Cold War period, and neoliberal context in the economic situation. So really there was, I'd say there was some space to discuss, there was no more threat of a global war happening, and there was some space to discuss and think of a new form of economic development, tackling both social issues and environmental needs. So from this conference were issued a declaration on environment with 27 principles, the Agenda 21 that provides concrete action for water, consumption patterns, mountain, agriculture, biotechnologies, waste, etc. Very concrete implementation proposals of the concept. And then important global treaties were adopted then, the global treaties on climate change and on biodiversity. So really the international community gathered and decided to tackle these international issues. 1992, 20 years ago, what has happened since then? Next, Johannesburg in 2002. Was nicknamed Rio -10. because of the lack of progress that had been done since 1992. The Rio principles were not really implemented. But yet there is something that was quite interesting, was the increased participation of the private sector. That was much more limited in 1992. And again, 10 years later, so basically next week, Rio 2012, what situations are we in? We are still in the crisis period, at least in Europe. The neoliberalism that was prevailing since the end of the 80s is now in crisis. The myth of self-regulating markets has been quite shaken, and there's probably some need for more regulation from the states regarding the economy. We now live in a multipolar world, and the balance of powers has shifted. Maybe not so much with governments, but more with the economic powers. Come to that later on. So that's for a brief record of historical perspective. What should we expect from Rio Plus 20, from the conference starting next week? The discussions will take place at the highest political level, and they will discuss the green economy, so this new concept that has been developed with UNEP. Green economy in the context of sustainable development and poverty eradication. That is a very broad and ambitious target. Another aspect that is going to be discussed is the institutional framework for sustainable development. As the previous speaker has mentioned, there is a financing problem of UN institutions. And maybe there is some way to rethink of how to better use the resources that are already allocated for these institutions, try and make the effort more efficient. 7 priority areas, including decent jobs, energy, sustainable cities, food security, agriculture, water, oceans, and disaster readiness. Political and economic context, as I said, is not the most favorable for such a type of discussion. We can draw a parallel here with the discussions on climate change that are really making very, very slow progress, to be optimistic. The Kyoto Protocol comes to an end by the end of this year, and we still don't know what is going to happen afterwards, because governments haven't agreed yet on commitments, reduction commitments of greenhouse gases. Next slide, please. So the issues, very briefly, that are going to be tackled on environmental side, climate change, resource depletion with biodiversity, oceans, forest, farmable land is becoming an increasing important issue. Water, question of quality, availability, accessibility of this resource. Question of waste, increasing amounts of waste to be managed, and also interestingly, maybe we could consider waste as a resource. For some materials, especially metals, the major sources for these metals now lies in waste, for instance, in used cell phones, used computers, rather than in the ground. Sustainable cities, disaster risk reduction, agriculture, and food security are major issues. Next one. From the economic aspect, trade and green economy, service, science and technology, energy, and low carbon transports. Again. And from society, an emphasis on poverty, green jobs, and social inclusion. And under this, all underlying is the question of governance. How, from an international point of view, can we really try and make the effort of going towards these objectives with the existing institutions that we have? Or maybe is it the time to discuss on a new intergovernmental body for sustainable development, define new goals and indicators for sustainable development, think also of how to implement sustainable development at national, local, regional sectors, so different levels of governance. Next. Briefly, to go more deeper into green economy. Green economy, you probably all have heard of the concept, or maybe you're very familiar with this. There's again not an agreement on the definition of green economy. The UN promotes green economy as economic policies that are relevant to sustainable development, to put it very briefly. The European Union on its side sees it more as a resource-light, ecological, competitive economy, while the OECD mentions more green growth strategies. So there is a slight misunderstanding on what is the green economy so far. And this will be part of the discussions to take place next week. The characteristics of the green economy rely on low carbon, the use of renewable energies, resource-efficient economy, the creation of green jobs that could contribute to poverty alleviation. It is very much focused on the environment. So what about the social aspects? What about human rights? How do they fit in this green economy pattern? Green economy apparently should be seen as a step, as a process towards achieving sustainable development. But if we narrow its view only to environmental aspects, we're probably missing part of the picture. Anyway, can it be a solution out of the crisis? We don't know yet. On the international government's side, is it the right timing for a new international institution, like the proposed intergovernmental body on sustainable development, with the difficulties of financing the activities of international institutions, as underlined by the previous speaker? Green economy roadmap. This is a proposal that maybe will come as a complement to the Agenda 21 with political and practical views on how to go and implement this concept, covering these major issues of agriculture, risk management and prevention, health, waste, etc. And the broad question, the Millennium Development Goals are coming to an end in 3 years from now. How do we integrate the green economy within these general broad Millennium Development Goals? Again, an open question. Next. Diverging views on the meaning of sustainable development are coming again on the table. If you read the positions of northern countries like Switzerland, they're very keen on insisting on the balance between the three aspects and three dimensions of sustainable development, while the South countries may insist more on poverty eradication and economic development. On sustainable development institutions, the UN Commission on Sustainable Development didn't function as well as desired, so can we achieve a consensus on institutional reform or not? The outcome of the conference is still pretty uncertain, in my opinion. Next one. Yet it must be underlined that this conference is going to be a multi-stakeholder conference. So it's not only government discussing between each other, there's also big participation from the civil society, including representatives from youth, women, farmers, indigenous people, NGOs, workers, trade unions, but also from local authorities. So we have here these regional multi-level aspects of sustainable development that is represented at the conference. And there is a big, big part of the business. The business has its own meeting and that was organized under the Business Action for Sustainable Development. And it's not simply a side event. It is really part of the discussion in the official agenda. Next one. So why should the private sector bother about the environment? Consider different environmental issues, starting with climate change, next, water, forests, biodiversity, waste. Environment represents multiple dimensions for a business. The first dimension is a dimension of a constraint. First constraint deriving from the very existence of these natural systems and the interaction, the impacts of human activities on this system through agriculture, industry, trade, waste, etc. The constraint from a business point of view is also the one of risk management. Risk management related to natural catastrophes, drought, floodings, but also to industrial accidents like oil spills, pollution that may derive from emissions of air pollutants for water polluting effluents, etc., etc. Another set of constraints for the business sector derives from the regulation. The regulation regarding environment has been increasing at international and national level over the past 20 and 40 years. And the business is now facing this regulation that has to be implemented, and also they're anticipating the coming regulation. So a whole set of constraints that makes it impossible for business to ignore environmental issues. But it's not only a set of constraints. In my opinion, environment is also opportunities, means opportunities. Why? Because these very same constraints are a booster, are a trigger for social economic innovation, for technology development. We have some examples here of innovation. Just stick to the first picture. Come back. Yeah, this one, the Velcro tape. Does anyone of you knows how the Velcro tape was invented? And why? Where the idea came from? The idea came from the observation of this flower, a thistle, that has the particularity, it has some hooks, and actually it was a Swiss engineer who invented the Velcro tape. He was just having a walk in the countryside with his dogs, and he noticed that the flower was hooked to the dog's hair, and just by studying, having a closer look at it, he understood how it was working and reproduced it on a tape, and we now use Velcro tapes. That's called biomimicry, just to mimic what is done in nature and reproduce it in technology. We've been using that all through the ages of all human history. Next one is an example of an electric car that is developed in India. Electric car have this positive effect on air pollution, that it has no emission of any kind of pollutants. Then you can discuss the impact of climate change, because it all depends how the electricity is produced. So the level of carbon emissions may differ depending on how the electricity is produced, but the overall effect on air pollution is good, especially in cities that are polluted. Next one. This is a solar boat. I don't know if you followed the trip around the world that this boat has just completed a few weeks ago, and is completely fueled by solar energy. There's the same experience with a plane, solar impulse, that is also being experimented. So these are technologies deriving from expected anticipated needs for alternative energies than fossil fuel. It is taking a long time to develop these technologies and to have these technologies used in commercial flights or commercial cargo, commercial shipping. But still, it's very interesting that that they're being developed, and there are opportunities deriving from a natural constraint. The next one. The next one is an example of a social adaptation to an environmental constraint. This one is a Swiss initiative called car sharing initiative. The idea being that instead of everyone owning their 1-2 more cars, you can have access to a system of rent a car on an hour basis. It is quite useful in a small country like Switzerland, where distances are short, where parking places in cities are scarce or getting scarcer, and where traffic jams is blocking cities. So the idea is just to use the car only when you need it, but not leave the car parked and not being used. So this is deriving from constraints, from transport, from energy uses, etc. And it's an example of a social adaptation to this constraint. Next one, again. So this means that from these constraints and these innovations, indeed for the business, derives business opportunities and in the end, profits. Yes. Okay. So from international governance, we have very often this traditional view of international conventions and governments regulating global problems, but these processes are derive in regulation that sometimes is difficult to implement. The whole range of environmental agreements that exist at international level are often not so well implemented. Complexity of international institutions make the process quite heavy to go on, and the economic political context may not be so favorable to this development. So what can we expect from the private sector regarding international environmental governance? Next one. So why should companies do something regarding environment, but also adding corporate social responsibility? Because of innovation, because they expect again increased reputation from taking initiatives regarding environment or social issues, because of risk management, because of domestic regulation they might anticipate or they might need to apply. How can they do it? Next one. Companies can act on their own, from their own initiative, or they can have recourse to standards and reporting systems. And it is interesting to note that these standards and reporting systems are really developing a lot. I've mentioned quite a few, but I would like to stress the most recent of them, which is the ISO 26000 standard on corporate social responsibility. It is not a certifiable standard, but still it gives some guidelines, a guidance for companies on what is corporate social responsibility, which areas they can be active in order to cope with these issues, and how they can do it. What is interesting also about ISO 26000 is how it was adopted, and its adoption process was very similar to the adoption process of an international convention, with interest groups meeting regularly at international level, so representatives from consumers, NGOs, corporations, discussing the content of the standard. So the question is, maybe there is here some scope to to see a convergence between, on the one hand, international regulation from the state, and on the other hand, initiatives and private regulation from the private sector. At the end, I think all of them are going towards the same goal, which is to sustain an economic activity that is balanced with social and environmental issues. I think I've finished. Yes, thank you for your attention. And thank you for the
you're more than welcome. So, does anybody have any questions? Yep, just look at the back.
Hello, I'm Jana. I was wondering that now when it was said that the governments and NGOs and the international organizations have less funds because of the crisis, is there a trend, or would it be possible that the private sector would pick up this kind of the work and become a very important player in this field, in sustainable development?
I think they are becoming important player in sustainable development, also because in the end they are the ones implementing the regulations, first of all, and then they can also anticipate or go beyond these regulations by taking their own initiatives.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. You spoke about the North and South countries, the differences between themselves. What about the differences between the developing and developed countries? Do you think that those notions are only possible in developed countries and not yet in developing countries?
I don't think so. I think there's a lot to expect from initiatives from emerging and developing countries that may may go further and beyond what's been achieved already by developed countries. Just by I was thinking, we were mentioning Brazil before. I was thinking of initiatives in Brazil that may by skipping some aspects of economic development that we had in industrialized countries and going directly to sustainable form patterns of economies.
And any other final questions?
Hello, Henna, I'm from the Netherlands/UK. This is again relating to the private sector and the responsibility that they have towards the environment. Do you feel that more effort should be made in the private sector towards being sustainable?
Well, I think it is always possible to make more effort than what is already being done, and not only for the private sector, also for civil society as a whole, and also from the government parts. Now the question is, what targets do you want to reach? What is the time frame you want to allocate to your effort, and your possibilities or capacities of achieving these targets? And I think that's especially here that the standards are interesting, because they can provide some form of accountability, of measurement of all these efforts that help knowing where we started, what we want to achieve, and at which point, at which state of implementation we are now.
Global governance today is based essentially on consensus. But when we look at the number of crises, and the growing number of crises, whether it's financial or environmental, like was mentioned by the Red Cross gentleman today, aren't we risking to have a system that is only capable of reacting to the last disaster rather than preparing for future resilience?
I think you have both aspects, the aspects of answering crisis and the aspects of looking forward and anticipating, and at international level you have both of them, especially I was mentioning the Millennium Development Goals that were really fixing some objectives for the first 15 years of the 21st century. These are general objectives with general goals, and they're long-term thinking. And then you have some answers, some replies to humanitarian or environmental crisis. I was thinking like emergency relief in Haiti, for instance, or responses after Fukushima, or you could think of others. And I think they both exist. And the fact that the system is based on consensus is not negative per se, because it helps the discussion needs to take place. So afterwards, after this discussion, you can really take measures. But then again, think of the different levels. You have the international, global level. You have the macro, meso, and micro level, global, regional, and individual or company level. There are different rationale for action, different incentives to act, but in the end, they're all within the same large scope.
Okay, any final questions for Dr. Ferrier? No? In which case, I would ask you to join me in just one final round of applause for Dr. Katherine Ferrier.
Thank you.